Keller is a modern-day shepherd, and he says that frequently these predators would remain on the rim rock, just waiting, looking. They're wanting to attack, waiting for their chance to strike. And though they're always there watching, these predators were helpless to make a move as long as the shepherd is correctly watching the sheep. There was an acquaintance of mine a while back. He was receiving these work-related death threats, and they were pretty serious. So he was given a bodyguard and some police protection. And I asked him if he was afraid during that time. He said, surprisingly, I felt relaxed. He said, I was surrounded by a little army of people whose job was to protect me, to make sure my enemies didn't get to me. It's the same way for us. We have these different types of enemies. Spiritual enemies, emotional enemies, physical enemies, whatever it is. And if we will just stay close to the shepherd, our great shepherd, these enemies cannot attack. There's all kinds of scriptures about that, about the protection of God. David said, Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. You know what we need to learn to do? We need to learn to focus on the banquet table, the feast. Enjoy it instead of looking at the enemy. We need to enjoy the blessings of God in this moment instead of obsessing over every little problem. There are times when we ought to tell ourselves, you know what? I've prayed about this. I've done all I can do. I've given it to God. So I'm going to stop thinking about this and enjoy my life. Enjoy the abundant blessings God gives me. And I'll have a good time on my walk with God, my walk with the shepherd. So that's the table. Let's look at the next phrase and talk about the oil. Thou anointest my head with oil. Another danger that sheep face is the nose fly. And yes, that name suggests what they do. They try to nest in the sheep's nose so they can lay eggs. And then a colony of larvae will attach themselves deep in the sheep's flesh, inside their nose. And it causes severe inflammation. And this sounds nasty, doesn't it? It really sounds bad. When the sheep have nose flies, they become agitated. They stomp their feet around all the time. They even butt their heads against rocks, just trying to rid themselves of the misery. The cure for this, and even the prevention, is for the shepherd to apply oil to the sheep's head, around his nose. Philip Keller writes this: once the oil had been applied, there was an immediate change in behavior. Gone was the aggravation, gone the frenzy, gone the irritability and the restlessness. Instead, the sheep would start to feed quietly again, then soon lie down in peaceful contentment. He goes on to say the oil symbolizes the Holy Spirit. When we allow Him to anoint us with His presence, most of the head-banging annoyances of life lose their significance. They lose their power to drive us to distraction. Why? One, because we know who's in control, and two, because the Holy Spirit gives us enough peace and joy that we just don't need to get stressed out about every little inconvenience. Elsewhere in the Bible, oil is talked about for all kinds of reasons. Refreshment. The Bible talks about oil making our face shine. He talks about it being perfume. Remember when Jesus had his feet anointed with oil and poured it all over him? That was perfume, very expensive perfume. It was used for consecration. Consecration is when you set something or somebody apart for God's use. Priests were anointed with oil for God's use. Kings and prophets were anointed with oil. Even furnishings and utensils that were used in worship for the temple, they were anointed with oil. Healing. Oil is used for healing. In James, the Bible tells us if we're sick, call for the elders and they should come and anoint with oil and pray. So you can get kind of greasy and get prayed for. And then you get well. Okay, kind of odd, but it's a symbolic thing. Oil. These symbolisms behind the phrase, "Thou anointest my head with oil," mean that you can be anointed by the Holy Spirit. Really. Poured over. His presence in your life will protect you, strengthen you, refresh you. It'll keep you consecrated in your walk with Jesus. It's a wonderful experience to have the Holy Spirit pouring over you. And that visual, isn't God good with word pictures? Communion, great word picture. Now He's got oil pouring over you like the Holy Spirit. Sweet. Now the last phrase. Let's talk about the cup. Now David is kind of getting off. We'll give him a pass here. He is getting a little off that metaphor of the sheep and the shepherd here. He can't contain himself to say, "My cup runneth over." He's saying, I have more God than I can contain. You ever felt that way about yourself? I bet you do the opposite. Oh, I wish I had more God. You have more God than you can contain. Is that not awesome? I didn't hear any amens or nobody jumped out of their seat or anything. You have more of God than you can possibly contain. Wow. David is saying, my life is a life of abundance. I was thinking about areas of my life where my cup is running over. Here's a partial list. I have a family that supports me and encourages me. I take it for granted. I have so much of that from them. I can't even contain all of it. I have more friends than I can spend time with. I say no to more lunch appointments than I say yes. They happen so often. I have more music and books in my library than I have time to listen to or read. Just don't have time for it. But they're there. I'm overabundantly blessed with that. I have experienced more answered prayer than I can remember. I've been forgiven more times than I can count. Just reminded in the last 24 hours of how many times I've been healed. And I had a bad cold, and it just, Friday night just kind of started, poof, my voice came back a little bit. And I'd only been to the doctor, 3 hours before that, and certainly the medicine didn't have time. Just reminded me how many times I've been healed of little bitty things. Now the truth is, there are probably a couple of areas in your life when the cup isn't quite full. And we're tempted to put our energy on focusing on what's not there, what's missing. Instead, we should make each day a day that we think about the abundance in our lives. And these are areas that God gives more than enough. And as you think about these things, you realize, yeah, my cup runneth over. Well, I've been encouraging you to do a little homework each week. This week is no different. Last week was a real easy one. Memorize verse 4, and then I told you to say, every time you can think about it, say, God is with me. God is with me. Just to remind you that He's there. Here's this week's assignment. Memorize verse 5. All right? First, just say it every time you get up in the morning, every time you go to bed at night, throughout the day. Say it with the other 4 previous verses. Get it inside of you. Second thing, yield to the Holy Spirit. Say a prayer every day. Ask the Holy Spirit to fill you. Ask the Holy Spirit to anoint you, to consecrate you, to refresh you, to strengthen you. And then the third thing, Make a Cup-Runneth-Over list. Start early with this one. I tell you to start early because my guess is you're going to remember things throughout the week you can add to it. Get your pen and paper or your digital device. Begin making a list. Now this is different from the first week. Remember the first week we made a list of all our blessings, material and spiritual. This is not just blessings. These are things that you have an overabundance of. Very simple one. Look in the refrigerator. How many things am I going to throw away this week? Because I've got so much. We are so blessed, so abundantly blessed. And the biggest mistake we can do is to focus on the material blessings, the money things, money itself or what money can buy. There's so much more important things than these. And God is willing to give us more than we have room for. He's already done it in so many ways. Here's what I've noticed. The more I focus on abundance in my life, the more abundance comes my way. It just seems to work that way. The more I focus on the abundance God has given me. I'm not talking about asking Him for more. Remember, we can't contain these abundance things. I'm talking about thanking Him for that. Focusing on it and see how much abundance is there. It just seems to come more and more and more and more. So see how that works for you this week. Do this little exercise. Focus on abundance and see if you are not so full of God you have no room for any more. Even though you desire it. Who doesn't want more of God? But how many of us are ignorant to the fact that our cup of God